My name is Feargall Kenny. I'm the founder of the Digital Irish group here in New York. Digital Irish is all about promoting Irish startups in the States. We host events every month to 6 weeks from September to June. To date, we've had about 170 Irish startups present at these events, and our whole goal is to make connections for these startups, typically around funding, customers, partners, employees, etc. So that's what I do on the side. During the day, I'm a recruiter. I run my own recruiting firm focused on sales chain of command people for SaaS companies, typically in marketing tech, e-commerce tech, and some applied enterprise technology firms. So my first suggestion around expanding business relationships in this time is to focus first and foremost on the reactive approach to doing so, getting people to come to you and making it their idea to do so. My suggestion here is that you innovate. Use this as a time to sort of experiment with ideas around publishing in different formats and around taking advantage of virtual events and experimenting with those. And firstly, publishing. Within the Digital Irish group, we've about a year and a half ago, we started to move beyond the physical events and started to push a lot more content. So we started to play around with different formats, right? So probably the most obvious example of that is what we did around podcasting. I mean, these days anyone can podcast, but it's a great long form, content format, and that's we've used that to good effect. And similar with our events, we're now videoing them. We do Facebook Live. There's other tools you can use out there like StreamYard that allow you to distribute across multiple platforms. But in both cases, we're able to sort of break that content into sort of bite-sized chunks and then reuse it afterwards. And I think in particular with live events, you don't want to just be limited to the audience that you have at that point in time, because it may not suit a lot of people to join when you're having your meeting. So to be able to break it up into smaller chunks and syndicate it out, maybe in a drip manner later on, is a good way to go. So so play around with different forms of content. I was listening to Gary Vaynerchuk a week or two ago, and he was just talking about how LinkedIn and posting on LinkedIn these days is one of the most effective organic channels in terms of reach, and it's still free, right? So when you do that, so take advantage of that. Use formats like podcasting, and then when it comes to events, obviously everyone is forced to go virtual. So play around with formats on that too, right? I mean, try drinks events, general networking events, try one-on-one chats. So those are some of the suggestions I'd have in terms of getting people to come to you. So the second point about expanding business relationships in this time of crisis is around proactively outreaching to your clients. My suggestion here is that you focus on existing clients first, and then you you look to maybe affinity networks to help you break into new clients. And in both cases, you're leading with both relevancy and, more importantly, empathy, right, to their current situation, and hopefully with a bit of context on where you need to apply that empathy. Now, empathy is a tricky one, right, because it's you have to know exactly how you're being empathetic. I mean, obviously there's the personal side where you can only find that out when you talk to people, but in the context of the company that you're targeting, this is maybe where you need to go for a trusted connection first to understand a little bit more about the broader context and where you need to be empathetic on. So it's empathy with context, right? So, and then obviously lead with something that's relevant. Don't cold call people out or reach out to people out of the blue with a service that isn't going to be hot for them in this particular time. When it comes to going after people cold, I mean, listen, obviously the economy has to move ahead, right? So don't feel bad about reaching out to people cold, but again, focus on relevancy. This is maybe a good opportunity to take advantage of affinity networks in particular. So to see if you can get a warm introduction to a company, maybe through, I mean, given that this is Enterprise Ireland, maybe through the Irish connection. I mean, that's exactly what the Digital Irish group is all about. One suggestion that I have, which is sort of unique to this situation, is that all the local events that are taking place in far-flung areas like New York and San Francisco, you may be sitting in Dublin, but now is your opportunity to take advantage of those events by joining them as a local. So if you check out websites like garysguide.org, you'll get a list of tech events, for example, that are happening in New York City that normally revolve around a physical location in New York City, but they've all since gone virtual. And now you have the opportunity to sort of jump into those events with as much relevancy and presence as a local. So take advantage of that and learn a little bit about the markets you might look to get into. So my third point about expanding business relationships in this time is to think about becoming a master of ceremonies, where you actually run the events as a host and as an interviewer, where it's less about yourself and less about your company and more about you providing the forum for interesting ideas, where your message comes across about your company comes across much more subtly, and it becomes just a subtle extension of your personal brand and your company's brand. It's more of a generous approach to content marketing and messaging, where it's not necessarily putting yourself front and center. This is where you are taking the role of the host, of the interviewer. You're providing the forum for content. Yes, you can make it sort of like, obviously you can make it very relevant to your brand. It could be about your customers, or you can make it sort of like, about your industry, or you could just make it, a general forum for talking to interesting people doing interesting things, right? I think the point is that a lot of times, people do try and sort of like really push their own message and their own company's message front and center. And sometimes the suggestion here is that sometimes a more subtle way, works just as well, where over time, if you provide that forum for really interesting guests to come along, indirectly people find out what you do and they get a little curious on it and they drill deeper. So my fourth point about expanding business relationships in this time of crisis is that there doesn't necessarily need to be a fourth point. You can stay silent, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just because you have the medium doesn't necessarily mean that you actually have to use it. In this time of crisis, we've seen a lot of people sort of jump to the opportunity to shout from the rooftops, push their content out there, and there's a lot of noise out there. And it's often better to wait till the noise dies down, because there's a greater chance that someone's actually going to be able to hear you. So to summarize, if you are looking to build business relationships during this time, I would suggest experimenting with formats now that we're forced to do virtual events, but also try podcasts and other innovative forms of publishing and getting your content out there. And when it comes time to being proactive and getting in front of customers, both existing and new customers, lead with empathy, lead with relevancy, and don't shy away from general networking and taking advantage of networking in the markets you're interested in expanding to. The other suggestions were to become an MC, like think about actually becoming the host and the forum of great ideas and content without necessarily pushing your own brand or your company's brand front and center. And finally, just know when to talk and when not to talk. Sometimes silence is underrated, and there's a good time and maybe a better time to say your message. So that's it for me. My name's Feargall Kenny. Again, I run Digital Irish, and if you're interested in reaching out to us, especially if you're expanding to the US, you can email us at hello@digitalirish.com. And you can also check our podcast out at digitalirish.com as well. So thanks for your time.